Beneath the roiling sky, a line of warriors stands in silence. Their armor glints with the last light of the dying sun. A chieftain steps forward, his blade drawn. Without a word, he slices across his palm, and crimson drips into a shared cup of wine. One by one, the men follow. They raise the cup, now darkened with the blood of every man present, and drink. The storm breaks above them as thunder rolls like the voice of the gods themselves. This was not merely a ritual, it was a binding of souls, an oath written in blood and sealed by fate. To break it meant death, dishonor, or worse, the curse of being forgotten. From the frozen plains of the north to the burning sands of the east, blood oaths have appeared across every culture, every age. Long before written law or signed treaty, men bound their loyalty through their own lifeblood. To spill blood together was to create something more sacred than family, a pact forged in pain and trust, in courage and fear. The blood oath was a weapon of spirit as sharp as any sword. It transformed groups of men into brotherhoods and armies into legends. But like every sacred promise, it carried a shadow. For an oath sworn in blood is not easily undone, and history remembers those who paid its price. Archaeologists and historians have uncovered traces of these rituals in nearly every corner of the ancient world. Among the Scythians of the steppe, the Greeks, the Celts, the Norse, and even the early Chinese states, blood oaths served as the ultimate act of loyalty. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described how Scythian kings would swear friendship by mixing their blood with wine and drinking it from a sacred vessel. In this act, their lives became intertwined, their fates indistinguishable. Among the Greeks, similar covenants existed, though cloaked in the language of the gods. Warriors and city-states alike invoked the divine as witness to their oaths, calling upon Zeus Horkios, the god of oaths, to punish the perjurer with ruin. In Norse sagas, men who became Bolbralig, blood brothers, would slice their palms and let their blood drip into the earth or onto a shared stone, pledging to stand by each other until death. Such rituals were not superstition, they were survival. In an age when trust was scarce and betrayal meant extinction, binding oneself in blood was the only sure way to create unity. The act of bleeding together was physical proof that one's word held weight, that loyalty was not just spoken but lived. The ancient mind believed that blood contained the essence of life, so to mix blood was to share that essence. It was not metaphor but metaphysical truth. 2 lives, 1 bond. Breaking it risked divine retribution, madness, or death. To an ancient warrior, that fear was as real as any blade. Yet the power of these oaths came with a terrible cost. The same loyalty that forged empires also doomed them. For every tale of brotherhood and unity, there is another of betrayal and vengeance. The Norse sagas tell of Sigurd and Gunnar, bound in blood yet undone by jealousy. The Mongol chronicles would later echo this tragedy in the story of Temujin and Jamuka. The bond that made men invincible also made them vulnerable. Once broken, it unleashed a fury that could shatter kingdoms. To betray a blood oath was to destroy not just trust, but the moral fabric of one's world. In this opening moment, we stand at the threshold of that paradox. The blood oath was both sacred and profane, a symbol of humanity's highest ideals and darkest impulses. It bound kings to their warriors, brothers to each other, and armies to their leaders. It turned wandering tribes into nations and rebels into conquerors. But it also chained men to vengeance and slaughtered peace in the name of loyalty. The story of the blood oath is, in truth, the story of human ambition itself, our desire to belong, our fear of betrayal, and our hunger for meaning in a violent, uncertain world. As the thunder fades and the warriors march into the night, the oath they have sworn will carry them through fire and glory, through triumph and despair. Some will die believing their loyalty was holy, others will live long enough to see it twisted into ruin. Across the centuries, their echoes remain, a reminder that blood, once spilled in promise, can never be taken back. And as the scene closes, we understand the question that will haunt every chapter that follows. What does it mean to swear your soul to another, and what does it cost when that bond is broken? The wind of the Eurasian steppe never stops moving. It sweeps endlessly across the open plains, whispering through tall grass that stretches from the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains. For the nomadic horsemen who roamed this vast horizon, the Scythians, Sarmatians, and later the Huns, life was as restless as the wind itself. Here, among tribes bound only by the strength of their word, the blood oath was not a symbol. It was law, faith, and survival all in one. When no written codes existed, when a man's loyalty was the only shield between life and annihilation, the ritual of blood brotherhood became the foundation of power. Herodotus, the great chronicler of the ancient world, gives us one of the earliest glimpses into this world of sacred bonds. He tells of Scythian kings who sealed alliances not through parchment but through pain. When two leaders agreed to peace or friendship, they would let their blood drip into a cup of wine, stir it with their swords, and drink together before the gods of war and sky. It was a ceremony as brutal as it was holy. The message was clear: our lives are now mixed, our fates intertwined. To harm one is to harm both. In this moment, two men ceased to be rivals and became kin by blood, not birth. It was this act that transformed scattered tribes into disciplined war hosts that terrified empires. Modern archaeology supports Herodotus's tales. Excavations in southern Ukraine and Kazakhstan have uncovered Kurgan burial mounds filled with gold, weapons, and ritual cups, vessels that may have once held the mingled blood of chieftains. The Scythians, masters of mounted warfare, were feared not only for their archery and speed but for their unity. Each rider fought not just for glory, but for the oath he had sworn before his brothers and gods. To break that oath was to die dishonored, cut off from the ancestral spirit that watched over the living. It was said that no Scythian could meet the eyes of his forefathers in the afterlife if he had betrayed his bond. But like all powers that bind men together, the blood oath could just as easily destroy them. One legend tells of two warlords, one a Scythian Basilius, the other his sworn ally, who shared blood in a pact to avenge a slain kinsman. For years they fought side by side, their bond unbroken. Yet as their power grew, so did their ambition. When the vengeance was finally achieved, suspicion crept in like a sickness. One began to believe the other had withheld spoils or plotted betrayal. Words became threats, and threats became war. Their followers, bound by the same oaths, were forced to choose between brothers. The steppe became a graveyard of loyalty, as warriors who had once shared blood spilled it freely upon the grass. It is said that when both leaders finally fell, their bodies were buried in the same mound, forever bound in death as they had once been in life. This cycle, unity born of oaths, destruction born of betrayal, became a pattern across the steppe. Blood oaths were powerful, but they were also perilous. To swear one was to submit completely, to surrender individuality for the sake of the bond. In that surrender lay both strength and doom. A single betrayal could turn entire clans into enemies overnight. And yet, despite the risk, the ritual endured. It endured because it answered something primal in the hearts of these nomads: the fear of isolation. On the endless plains, to stand alone was to die. But to be bound in blood was to be immortal, part of something that outlived the self. This fierce brotherhood shaped the way steppe armies moved and fought. They rode not as soldiers but as extensions of each other, guided by the invisible thread of trust. When one warrior charged, his brothers followed without hesitation. When one fell, another took his place, avenging him without question. To outsiders, Greeks, Persians, later Romans, this seemed like chaos, but it was a different kind of discipline. The oath created a cohesion stronger than any general's command. Every drop of blood shed in battle reminded them of the drops they had once offered in ceremony. From these steps would emerge a military ethos that echoed through millennia. The Sarmatians carried it westward, influencing even the early legends of Arthurian knights and their sacred vows. The Huns and later the Mongols inherited the same spirit, binding men to their khans through oaths that could not be broken without blood. What began as a ritual between two riders became the foundation of entire empires. The bond of brotherhood, born under a boundless sky, would soon shape the course of history itself. And yet, for all their victories, these oaths carried a dark prophecy. Every bond, no matter how sacred, contains the seed of its undoing. For in loyalty's shadow waits ambition. The blood that once sealed unity would one day spill in rivers as brother turned against brother. The steppes had taught mankind both the beauty and the curse of the oath. As we turn from this wild horizon to the ordered world of Rome, we will see how an empire sought to tame that ancient ritual, turning blood loyalty into iron discipline and brotherhood into obedience to the state. In the heart of the ancient Mediterranean world, far from the restless winds of the steppe, another kind of oath was taking shape, one that would bind not brother to brother, but man to empire. To the Romans, loyalty was not a private matter of friendship or kinship, it was a sacred duty to the residential publica, the republic itself. And in this transformation, the blood oath evolved from a tribal ritual into a cornerstone of civilization. What the nomads swore beneath open skies, the Romans forged in the shadow of temples and eagles. This was the sacramentum militare, the soldier's oath of allegiance. Every Roman legionary, from the humblest recruit to the most seasoned centurion, was required to swear it. Standing before his commander, with his hand raised to the heavens, the soldier pledged his life, his honor, and his obedience to the Imperium Romanum. In its earliest form, this oath was made to the Republic, to defend the state and obey its lawful magistrates. It was an act of devotion that elevated the Roman army above the simple mercenary forces of other nations. They were not fighting for gold, but for fides, faith, loyalty, and duty. Livy and Polybius both record the weight of this ritual, the belief that to break one's sacramentum was not merely treason, but sacrilege. The gods themselves, especially Jupiter, were called as witnesses to the soldier's vow. In the Republic's golden age, this oath built an unbreakable machine. The Roman legions were disciplined, efficient, and fearless because their loyalty was absolute. Each man understood that his word bound him not only to his comrades, but to the eternal will of Rome. The sacramentum unified soldiers who came from distant provinces, languages, and tribes into one collective identity. The legionary's soul belonged to the Republic, his blood was Rome's to command. When Roman generals like Scipio Africanus or Gaius Marius led their men into battle, it was not merely strategy that won wars, it was the invisible power of the oath, a shared faith that Rome itself was divine. But as the centuries passed, this sacred bond began to change. The same instrument that had united the Republic would slowly become the chain that bound it to tyranny. Ambitious men, first Sulla, then Pompey, and finally Julius Caesar, learned that the sacramentum could be redirected. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, his soldiers did not swear by the Senate or the Republic. They swore by him. The oath, once made in the name of Rome's eternal law, became personal. It was no longer about service to a state, it was about devotion to a man. This shift was catastrophic and irreversible. The gods of the Republic had been replaced by the charisma of warlords. For the soldiers who followed Caesar, this was no betrayal, it was faith fulfilled. Caesar had led them to victory in Gaul, given them spoils and honor. To them, the oath of loyalty to their general felt as sacred as any prayer to Jupiter. But for the Republic, it was the beginning of the end. The Senate no longer commanded the army commanded the Senate through the man it adored. When Caesar fell beneath the daggers of Brutus and Cassius, he died with the name of his friend and betrayer on his lips, but also with the knowledge that his idea had already triumphed. Never again would Rome's armies swear allegiance to the Republic. From Augustus onward, every soldier would swear directly to the emperor. Under the empire, the sacramentum became the tool of absolute control. Legionaries pledged obedience to the emperor's person and heirs, invoking divine wrath upon themselves should they fail in loyalty. The oath was renewed annually, a ritual that reinforced the idea that the emperor was not merely a man, but the living embodiment of the state. Polybius's ideal of civic duty had evolved into something colder, more efficient, and infinitely more dangerous. The Roman military became a machine of devotion, its faith focused not on gods or law, but on the singular will of its ruler. It was the perfection of order, and the death of freedom. Yet even within that iron order, humanity still bled through. Soldiers stationed at distant frontiers, from Britannia to Syria, often formed their own private brotherhoods. They mixed local gods with Roman oaths, creating small cults of loyalty and camaraderie, a faint echo of the ancient steppe blood bonds. Some swore informal oaths to their centurions, sharing wine and wounds as their ancestors had once shared blood. These men lived in the shadow of empire but still clung to the oldest of human needs: to belong, to trust, to be bound by something sacred. The story of Rome's oaths is one of transformation and corruption. What began as a moral promise to protect a community became an instrument of domination. The blood oath, once a link between equals, had evolved into a chain of hierarchy, binding millions to a single master. Rome had taken the primal magic of the ancient world and forged it into steel. But with each victory, the question grew sharper. What happens when loyalty becomes obedience and devotion becomes submission? As the legions marched under their emperor's banner, the world trembled before their unity. Yet beneath that unity lay the same old truth: the deeper the oath, the darker its shadow. In the east, another empire was rising, one that would fuse the raw passion of brotherhood with the divine authority of kings. There, across mountains and steppes, the blade of loyalty would gleam again, this time in the hands of warlords whose oaths were written not only in blood, but in destiny. Across the vast expanse of Asia, the blood oath evolved into something both sacred and terrifying. In Japan, it became the heart of Bushido, the samurai's code of loyalty and death. A warrior's oath to his lord was absolute, his life merely the vessel for his promise. When defeat or disgrace came, a samurai could atone only through seppuku, spilling his own blood in a final act of honor. In that crimson offering, the ancient oath of the steppes found its spiritual echo in the disciplined silence of Japan's warrior class. The chronicles tell of Kusunoki Masashige, a 14th-century samurai who swore eternal loyalty to Emperor Go-Daigo. Surrounded and doomed at Minatagawa, he refused to surrender. Before his last charge, he said, "Would that I had 7 lives to give for my emperor." His death became legend, proof that a warrior's blood was the purest ink for an oath. Meanwhile, on the Mongolian steppe, loyalty took a different shape. There, men swore and a blood brotherhood sealed by mixing blood with milk and drinking it together. Temujin, who became Genghis Khan, bound himself to Jamuka in such a pact. Together they dreamed of uniting the clans, but ambition tore them apart. When they finally met again as enemies, Temujin granted Jamuka a noble death, breaking his back so no blood would spill. From their shattered bond, an empire was born. In both the samurai's silence and the Mongol's storm, the blood oath was life's highest truth, and its cruelest trap. It united worlds, yet doomed them to endless cycles of loyalty and betrayal. The East had perfected the oath's power, and in doing so, discovered its curse. As the medieval world gave way to the dawn of empires, the blood oath no longer belonged only to warriors. It became the tool of kings and conquerors. In Europe, knights swore fealty to their lords upon relics and crosses, but beneath the ceremony, the meaning was ancient. To break one's vow was to die in shame. During the Crusades, entire armies bound themselves by sacred oaths, believing their cause was sealed by divine blood. Yet, as always, power tested loyalty more than any battle could. History remembers the Templars, warrior monks who took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, bound not to kings but to God. Their discipline made them unstoppable, but their secrecy made them feared. When the French crown turned against them, the same oaths that once elevated them now condemned them. Betrayed and burned, their Grand Master Jacques de Molay died defiant, his final words cursing the king and pope who broke their sacred bond. The flames that consumed him were not only fire, they were the death of trust between crown and knight. Further east, empires like Byzantium and the Ottoman Caliphate wielded oaths as weapons of control. Janissaries, taken as children, were bound to the Sultan by ritual loyalty stronger than family or tribe. But when that devotion faltered, the very institution that once protected the empire helped bring it down. By the late medieval age, the oath had shifted from blood to ink, yet its spirit was unchanged. Men still killed for loyalty and died for betrayal. From the Crusaders' banners to the secret councils of kings, the blood oath had evolved into politics, religion, and power itself. But its essence remained. The price of trust was always blood. Time has buried the warriors who first swore blood beneath open skies, but their echoes remain. The oath they created still shapes the modern world. Though we no longer cut our palms or drink from ritual cups, the instinct endures. Every soldier who swears to defend his nation, every comrade who promises never to leave another behind, carries the same spirit that bound Scythian riders and Roman legions. The form has changed, the fire has not. In the silence before battle, when soldiers clasp hands or exchange a final look, the ancient bond stirs again. It is the promise that no one fights alone, that loyalty outlives fear. Modern oaths, spoken before flags or carved in metals, are the polished descendants of those primal pledges made in blood. Yet even now, the same danger lingers. The loyalty that builds nations can also blind them. History has shown that absolute faith, when twisted by ambition, still leads to ruin. Beyond the battlefield, echoes of the oath live in politics, religion, and friendship. Secret brotherhoods, revolutionary movements, and even criminal syndicates all seek the same sacred bond, trust so strong it defies death. But every bond demands a price. The same devotion that unites can enslave, the same faith that protects can destroy. As the ages turn, one truth remains unbroken: humanity cannot exist without its oaths. They are the thread between love and war, courage and cruelty, freedom and obedience. Perhaps that is why the blood oath endures, not because it is ancient, but because it is human. And so, the camera fades on the empty steppe, wind whispering through grass and bone. A voice lingers, empires fall, names fade. But the blood oath endures, because the war for loyalty never ends.